I
You
meant
have a
me.
big gun. You are not the big gun.
Tony, don't be jealous.
No, it's subtle, all the bells and whistles.
Yeah, it's called being a badass.
Fine.
This particular sequence that I'm going to show you is one that was kind of put in at the very end and had additional stuff that we hadn't really anticipated needing to do. And, you know, when it was initially designed, we were going to be actually setting back. The whole event was going to take place on top of this tower back here in the back. We had roughly 35 shots, I believe, that this had to be kind of spread out amongst. Some of them were a wider shot like this. Some were very long lens, very in tight, very intimate moments where you would see even less of the basically background. You know, and of course, you know, along with that, what we needed to do is set up some form of kind of continuity between the shots. Nothing worse than cutting from one shot to the next shot and then suddenly realizing, well, that, you know, fires in the wrong position or a different position than it was before. So what we came up with was an approach that was different than an approach we used earlier in the movie, where we actually made a 360-degree panorama sight that would allow us to move the digital camera anywhere we wanted to within that environment. The feeling here is, since we were pretty much kind of in the same angle and it was just either pushing in or looking a little left or looking a little right, we didn't really need to go to the route of building a full 3D environment that we could move around in. Now, for this background, like I said, you know, a little interesting story about this is that, you know, as I mentioned, they were shot on top of a metallic roof to match this here, so we were unable, of course, to just extract them out. We actually came back in and did the rotoscoping to isolate them out from the plate. We actually had to do a little bit more of relighting because since they were initially going to be up here, there was more firelight hitting them, and there was a bank of lights right along kind of their ankle level as well that was illuminating them. So we had to try to relight the blue screen a little bit to that, and actually, you know, that lighting in the blue screen actually is what was a driving force about how we would put together the background. You know, we purposely tried to put flame to the left, flame to the right, so that we had justified this light source. So is it accurate? Probably not. I mean, you probably would not get that much exposure on the left and right side of the faces, but by creating a background that kind of simulates that, you're able to cheat it in, and it takes the curse off of that blue screen feel, which is always something that we're trying to do. Now, you know, a lot of times what we do for this texture, we had to find a roof texture. We actually went out and with a still camera shot a rooftop texture that we then brought into the composite and, you know, color timed it back into the background. We also came along, it felt a little boring there, needed stuff, so we added trash up there. And then we actually put a little bit of a water reflection in there just to give a little bit more interest to it. So this is one of the backgrounds that was shot. They shot it, of course, about dusk. You know, since it is a night shot, they were decided to go this route instead of a day for night because we would get a lot of car lights on, and you know, it was kind of done around, I guess, rush hour, and would give a lot of movement to the plate, give it a lot of life. Now, the danger with doing something like that is, you know, you have to do a plate stitch, and you know, for a still frame, plate stitching are just, you know, day in, day out, you do them all the time. It's not a big issue anymore. But, you know, for us, we actually had to take it in, and we had our layout artist create us a layout camera, and we ran it in through the Nuke nodes here that allows us to do that. So we would end up with an image, as this builds up here, that was essentially, you know, a pretty wide resolution. We then had to calculate, well, how much of this are we going to actually need to use? And so by there again, taking a rough version like this, we took it into the layout and determined where we were going to be for the specific angles, and found out that, you know, the most we would see might be over here, And then same way over here as far as this area. So we ended up coming up kind of with a crop that we would utilize in this area here. It was a little bit of guessing and trial and error, but we came up ultimately with a format that we ended up using that we called 8K-ish. It wasn't quite an official 8K resolution, but it was somewhere in that. And essentially, we were taking that 8K 1-to-1 pixel crop out of something that I think was closer to maybe 12 to 15K as far as the overall width. So this actually is how our layout camera came about. After we calculated this out and figured the distance from the camera to the actual expo back there, we ended up getting, this projection that we would put on the 3 planes. Now, once we got this done, of course, there are some seams that you have to deal with. If you notice down in this area specifically, you get into issues with traffic because traffic's moving. And since this was not shot with a specific camera array that would capture all of it at one time, this was kind of the poor man's version. Camera here, you run it for a few frames. Camera here, you run it for a few frames, and so on and so forth. So we ended up with definite seams that we had to deal with. Now, there's a couple approaches you can do to that, and for us, we ended up picking kind of some critical areas where we could hide it. This one you can't see it yet, but one of the final comps, it's like sometimes you find out you got a bridge line or a break here. This is an ideal place to put a break in. We talked about if it got really bad, we were actually going to put an additional bridge in there or some type of geometry that would hide it. If you do watch this and really look close, there's only, I think, 1 or 2 shots were really wide enough to see the traffic. And at that point in time, there's a camera move on it, so you really don't detect it. If you're looking really hard for it and you're really astute, you probably can see it once, we point things out. But there's definitely speed differences, like the traffic coming in here on the right-hand side moves a lot faster than the left. Now, once we had that background done, we sent this over to our Digimat department. And they came out with a matte painting to work with. Now, unfortunately for us, we don't have the correct lookup on this, so it's going to look a little different than what the final composite was. But the Digimat artist went in here and did an incredible job on all of this, building all of the environment and stealing. When I say steal, it's borrowing real footage from plants and that we either had in our element database or actually he tended to go out and do a lot of shooting. In fact, as I point out back here, this back hillside is actually the Oakland Hills as seen from San Francisco. Now, and why do we do that? Of course, anytime you can get realism, start out with a plate that is real, you really should use that because that gives you the opportunity to one thing, do a lot less work. And it also gives you a good reference guide as far as what you need to guide towards. You see how kind of diffused and blown out some of this type of stuff is here. That's a good indication of where we're going to have to go with this ultimately, which is what the plan was. We have our Kodak signs, the Digimat artist, he added animation to all of this stuff, and he's got twinkling lights and all of these neon displays and just incredible work they did. With all of that said, still when it comes down to the final putting it into the plate and composite, that takes a whole lot of time too. And the feeling is, it's like, why waste, the talent of the Digimat artist dealing with that when a compositor can come in and, finish it off while they go on to do another shot. I'll back up a little bit and kind of let you see how we approach the comp on this. We tend to go with a little bit more of a vertical kind of compositing approach. I know there's a lot of different techniques and a lot of different ways people do it, but by doing this, you can slice a whole area of the comp, and let's just say that they've determined that this is already spread out, but you need to plug in a new element right in here. You can actually select that and move it up, and suddenly you've left yourself this big open space to put stuff in, and it's pretty easy for someone to come along if necessary, that you need the compositing supervisor to go in and pick up the shot or hand it off to someone else. So the more organized you can be, the better off you are. So the vertical tree works out really well in that situation. And another thing that some of us tend to do is color coding of panels. So you notice we have a red panel here, and I look throughout the composite here, and there are several red panels. Well, that is all the same element, which was a red flashing light. Okay, so it's a no-brainer. I'll make it red. So I can look at this composite really quick and say, okay, well, that element is probably the same element through the whole comp. Here the fire, these left passes, they were used multiple times because the footages were like 2,000 frames. So if you've got an element that's working and you want to keep consistency and you have that many frames, use the same one, just use different sections of the sequence to get the variation so you don't get the repetition. And this actually ended up being pretty long once we were done. I think it was roughly about 300 frames to avoid a lot of recycling. Now, as we went through the composite, this particular shot does not have, because this is a pre-comp, a lot of rendered elements right now. So you'll notice that for the most part, all of the elements tend to be on the left side of the tree here. We like to keep the practical shot elements on one side of the tree and any CGI rendered stuff on the other side of the tree. So what you have is when you look at a composite, you know if you've got to go find an element, you can look at the left-hand side, kind of scroll down through it and find it, or look at the right-hand side. Pretty complex composite. There was a lot of stuff involved in with it. And so we got down to the point where we thought we had something that was pretty close that we wanted to show to the director and say, hey, we think we got a final here. And we ran it into a few shots. You're still seeing some various stuff out here that was actually never visible in the angles that we had. But for the most part, I think, we were kind of, cropped into kind of, I think, about this area here was kind of the active area for the most part. So any of that miscellaneous stuff you were seeing did not show up. And there again, we worked really hard to eliminate any overlapping stuff. And you can see some of the problems getting distortion down in here, but there again, when this was used, we ended up not going down actually lower than that. So why worry about stuff down here that you're never going to see? But we kind of purposely designed the shots to where we had our problem areas we'd be able to avoid. So anytime you can do that, it's worth your while. Now, he pushed this back and said, guys, it looks great, but it just doesn't seem quite real yet. So, what we're going to do. The director says it doesn't look real. That always sends us into a little bit of a think tank discussion, shall I say. Where we go, okay, well, what's wrong with this? What do you see? And so we pulled a lot of people in, had a lot of people look at that. We showed it to other effects supervisors, and they weighed in on what was missing. And the feeling was it just hadn't been quite, filmified, or we kind of call it the filmification, something like that, turning our digital stuff into something that looks like it's actually captured on film. And how do you go about doing that? It's several processes that you go through. Sometimes we'll actually take the background and we kind of jitter the pixels so that we end up with a pass that is kind of diffused. It's not blurred, but the pixels are displaced on a fine pattern, and then we mix a percentage of that back with the original background, and now you have something that is a little less synthetic. It feels like it's got a little bit more of the characteristics you have when you capture stuff on film. Now, one thing we ended up doing was creating a lot of mattes. So we did a luminance extraction of the background, so we got the hot areas, but we didn't want to do it to everything. So this is where the artistic side comes in. All of this stacked nodes here are matte after matte after matte after matte after matte after matte put together, and then put into basically a color card that had a value that was recognizable in the actual plate photography. So once we, got this added to it, as I zoom down, you'll start to see what happens here. Suddenly, around the sign here, we're getting blooming that comes over, this chromatic aberration that everybody hates, in their still photography. I know I do. But we have to add that in to make it real, to keep it from being synthetic. And it really helps a lot. I mean, initially we applied it to all this up here and it just didn't look right. And so we had to go back and rework that. I mean, the other thing you did here, you can't see because we don't have the running footage, but you know, all of these lights in the background, anything in the distance, we actually ran a noise pattern through that was translating up, and used that to kind of do an in and out. So the light would kind of flicker up and down a little bit. Any night, if you're near a big city, go out and look, especially in the summer. If you've got a nice clear night, you'll see the lights are all sitting there dancing. You know, it's a little bit of stuff, and you know, what is causing that dancing? Of course, it's heat. Distortion basically in the environment. I mean, you're dealing with a gas between you and that light source, and any smoke, any pollution, anything that's environmental will affect how the film captures it. So you know, the other thing we did is we went back as when we were initially looking at this too, we were looking at reference footage. We go all the time and look at reference videos. So you know, as you go down through this, there's a lot of stuff still added. We did a lot more glows, and you know, as the shot progressed down, we kept adding more and more stuff. I'm not going to go through this. We added more red lights. We added even more stuff here that was put in at the last minute and not cleaned up too well, because sometimes you just have to get the show out. And here, as we build up, you can see how big a change. There again, this here was not visible, so you can kind of ignore what you're seeing up in that area. But we also did mattes and colored areas of it differently, because there again, in the real world, you know, when we put this smoke haze in, you know, we tried to use some of the background to illuminate what we were seeing, but it still didn't feel quite right. It felt like it was an element. It felt too consistent. So by coming in and creating garbage mats, we were actually able to punch holes in it. So in areas where it was darker, you punched it down a little bit so it didn't haze that out. And areas that were brighter, maybe you punched it a little bit brighter. You know, especially down in this area, you really get the feeling of, okay, well, now that looks okay, but this looks so much better because this is what you would see. And you notice how we eat in to the plate here and blow through stuff. You got to ignore that little mistake. But that adding that aberration and that stuff, you know, especially down in this area, see, that's plate, and here's what we added. You know, it's just replicating what was there, or blowing this out, and you know, going to the extreme, especially on the Kodak side back here. You know, this looks great, but this just helped it so much, getting that bright, intense light. And same way in here, you basically, you're overexposing your film. And so, you know, computer graphics, you can't really overexpose it because you're not dealing with it in the same way. I mean, you have to think in the film background, the film, you know, a film process in order to replicate it. So Iron Man 2 was a great project. We had a lot of fun with it. You know, we'd love to see a third one. We'll see what happens with that. And I would love to be involved with that as well. But thank you very much for your time.